Chapter 19. Dogs, Boys, and the Unspared Rod. Every time I see in the papers where some young thug is up for casual murder or senseless assault, and every time I see a picture of a man who was just made chairman of the board from a standing start of nothing, I get the same sensation. A distinct tingling in the caboose or rear end. It dates back to being a boy and having a respect for law and order, and eventual achievement imprinted onto my behind with a stick, switch, or limber lash. I sometimes think we don't beat our children, wives, and dogs frequently enough these days, or there'd be fewer creatures who mug strangers, get divorces, and jump onto gentlemen wearing blue suits. That notion came into my head the other day when little Satchmo just turned 3, which is 21 the way humans count time, got all excited because it was the heat season around here and Satch hasn't met any girl dogs, formally or informally. Satchmo is a boxer who looks just like his namesake, one Louis Armstrong, who plays a trumpet and sings in gravelled tones. This juvenile delinquent Satch got all excited about a bitch across the street being in season, and he took it out on his toothless father in a completely senseless but very fierce attack. I suddenly found myself in the midst of the fray, beating a 3-year-old boxer on the back of the neck with my bare fist. The beating didn't have much effect on the boxer, although I came out of the incident with jammed knuckles, a swollen hand, and 2 very decent accidental bites. But what did have an effect on the sap-raising little man was a session in the back room with a very heavy Texas-type belt. It had been a long time since I really walloped a dog. I had forgotten that dogs and children can use a tanning once in a while, when they get too big for their britches, and my own rear end tingled as it remembered a few unpleasant afternoons I had experienced on the receiving end of the strap in the woodhouse. Spare the rod and spoil the child was a phrase I heard quite often around my house when I was a young'un, and I can assure you I was not spoiled. Satch isn't spoiled as of today either, and I can practically promise you that he isn't going to be chewing on his toothless papa anymore. But the strange thing is that one sound licking has made a new man out of what had been a shamefully pampered puppy. Satch has a fresh dignity. He also responds to commands. He also doesn't get on the wrong sofas or jump up onto the guests, and he seems to look at the boss with a new, if rather puzzled respect. I wonder if I wasn't a couple of years late with the belt business. The 2 people who knew most about dog training, working dogs I mean, that I ever met were the old man and a fine black gentleman named Eli Wilson. Wilson was better than the old man, if that's possible, and I seem to remember now that he used to cut himself a whippy switch when a particularly headstrong puppy persisted in running up birds or failed to respect another dog's point. Eli, a very kind man whose animals adored him, would take this limber switch and in the words of the Carolinas simply wear out the youngster while saying "whoa" with every lick. This was momentarily unpleasant to the puppy, but very shortly, when Eli hollered "whoa," the dog associated the word with the limber stick and whoaed. His dogs still retained the high spirits that made them superb in their business, which was quail finding, but they now worked as executives instead of freelance hot rodders with strange haircuts. The old man had a trick about retrieving that was also a little hard on the animal at the time, but generally turned out feather-perfect retrievers. It was more or less a gradual process, such as treating the boy to be careful with a gun first before he taught the boy the business of ballistics and lead-off angles, by merely making the boy try to hit a running cousin with a stream of water from a hose. The boy, I might say, grew up to be a gunnery officer in the Navy and had remarkable success in teaching lead-off angles to green gun crews with the old hose technique of pointing ahead of what you want to hit, so that the target and the water merge at the logical time and place. This puppy, Sam or Pete or Tom or Joe, is a mortal cinch to chew up the first quail he ever lays mouth to, the old man said. So first you catch him in the act. You've already taught him to fetch a stick or a ball, even if you have to wind him in on a length of rope. Now you got to convince him that this bird you shot is not a stick or a ball, but something you want delivered intact when you holler fetch. Yes, sir, I seem to remember saying. I had been taught to say yes, sir, and please and thank you, and I knew that little boys should be seen and not heard at the table. I had been taught this painfully, as I had been taught to fight plaguing little monster named Wendell, who wouldn't let me out of the yard. I would run and cry when Wendell fell upon me. The old man took a stick to me. It's just a matter of who hurts you the worst, he said, me with this stick or that little boy you run from. Because every time you run from Wendell, I'm going to lay this lath on your backside until you go back and fight him. Wendell and I have been friends now for about 38 years, give or take a month. The battle could have been called a draw. The old man broke the stick over his knee and gave both us battered kids a nickel to buy ice cream cones. Now, the old man said, in this business of training a puppy to bring you back the bird with its feathers nice and dry and the meat unchewed, there ain't no sense beating the dog for mouthing a bird. The dog is a young'un and the bird is still warm, maybe even still alive a little bit. If you beat the dog, he'll figure that you're beating him for getting the bird for you. What do? I don't know, sir, I said. One of the things you learned about the old man was that a confession of innocent ignorance was very often to be preferred to a smart aleck error, or even to smart aleck non-error. The old man was like a boy in a way. He didn't want to be deprived of a chance to show off once in a while. Well, I'll show you. Now suppose you see if you can hit the next bird the dog points, and after you've shot, hang on to old Frank with one hand and the puppy with the other, and let me be your bird dog. Frank stood a covey, and I hit with the first and missed with the second. The first bird fell in a shower of feathers in an easy patch of ground peas. Frank was trained to hold a point until the fetch command came. I hollered hold, and made a dive for the puppy, managing to collar both dogs. The old man went over to where the drifting feathers had settled on the peanut stalks and bent over the dead bird. In a minute, he said, "Now hang on to the old dog, holler fetch, and let the little feller go." Off bounded the puppy, looking for a bird, while the old man said steadily, "Dead, dead, dead," and the puppy located the bird and pounced on it with a hard mouth full of sharp puppy teeth. The puppy bit down on the dead bird and let out a horrified yelp. He dropped the bird, spat out some feathers, and stood looking at the bird with his ears cocked. "Now fetch dead," the old man said. "Bring it here. Give it to me. That's a good boy." Those were commands the puppy had learned in the backyard training sessions over the tin pie plate of food. The puppy picked up the dead bird very gently now and brought it to the old man as if he might be very happy to get rid of it. The old man handed me the bird and grinned. He had used one of the oldest dog training tricks in the world, I guess. He had merely taken a broad rubber band, studded it with needle-pointed tacks, and slipped it around a dead quail's body. When the puppy chomped down on the dead bird, the bird more or less bit back. Puppy's teeth are sharp, but half-inch tacks are sharper. "He might forget and mouth the bird again," the old man said. "I doubt he will, but you keep this rubber band handy in your hunting coat, and if he does mouth a bird again, give him another dose of the same treatment. About 2 doses is generally enough. Dogs ain't generally as big of fools as people." The old man entertained some sort of premise that it was nice to try to reason with a dog or a boy, but if the dog or boy didn't listen to reason, then you had to find some way to impress him that wrong was wrong and good was good, and black was not white. He was all for the initial ounce of prevention, but he generally had a long ton of cure in reserve. I don't know if he invented the choke collar or not, but we had a magnificent lemon and white English setter named Sandy that had a nasty habit of stealing other dogs' points, breaking to shot, and occasionally running up coveys out of sheer jealous arrogance. The old man went to the local blacksmith shop, had a short consultation with the boss, and eventually, in a shower of sparks, emerged with a slip-noose collar that seemed to be constructed of sharp-nailed fingers. "Next time Frank points and Sandy starts to steal it, I'm going to drape this thing around Mr. Sandy's neck. When he bolts, you'll hear me holler, 'Whoa!' Don't pay no attention, just go ahead and shoot. I'll be in command of the rest of the situation." It is sort of difficult to work this mousetrap operation with coveys because Sandy was a winder and a far-ranging, high-headed genius with a radar nose. Frank was a single-bird expert, and a lot of his careful close work was wasted by the arrogant Sandys rushing around full-headed in close cover. Sandy could generally manage to run up more birds out of shooting range than Frank could nail with his Swiss watch accuracy in finding singles after the flush covey scattered in the broom or in the edge of the branch. It came about one day that Frank pinned a single in a patch of scrub pine, and Sandy came up behind and as easily as gently as craftily as a cat burglar began to encroach on the point. He was so intent on theft that he paid no attention when the old man more or less lassoed him with this strange, cruel-looking collar. All of a sudden he made his pounce, flashed by Frank, and flushed Frank's private bird. I shot and killed the bird just after I heard the old man yell whoa. When I turned and saw the old man hanging onto a lead with a half-choked lemon and white English setter, his eyes bugged out on its other end. I believe that if there's crime, there ought to be punishment, the old man said. Sandy is a criminal. I have just taught him a lesson that they used to teach highwaymen in England. If you steal, you hang. Hanging is not pleasant, is it, Sandy? He slacked the line and took the choke collar off the dog's neck. He patted Sandy on the head. The next time I holler whoa, you'll whoa all right. And, he said to me, the next batch of singles we hit, we'll slap this collar back on Mr. Sandy again and see if we can't restrain his high spirits by exerting just a little pressure on his neck with my tailor-made gallows rope. Just sort of play him out a little bit, like you'd play a fish. I came up through several dynasties of dogs, pointers, setters, spaniels, just plain feist dogs with black curled tails, and even one hybrid that seemed to be at least one part muskrat, judging from his appearance. They all worked well. They answered the whistle and brought the dead birds, even doves, which they hated because of the free-falling feathers, and they backstood each other and slowed down on singles and watched where the ducks fell and responded to a waved hand when they were hunting very far out. Only one I remember was as a natural. The rest learned it through the tough backyard discipline. First the commands with food and the toss ball, next the switch, and finally through such refinements as choke collars and tack-studded rubber bands. Mainly they were dogs to be proud of, and they seemed to be proud of themselves once they worked the orneriness out of their system. You can't give a dog a nose, the old man said. Only God can teach him to smell, but by the Lord Harry you can teach him decent manners, and you can teach him to use what nose he's got to the best advantage of all of us. You might remember, the old man continued, when you grow up and have some young'uns of your own, that the word whoa is a valuable word for a child as well as a puppy, since children ain't nothing but puppies anyhow, and that a lecture accompanied by a sharp rap on the rear has more weight than a lecture without a sharp rap on the rear. I will ask you a question to prove it. What should little boys be at the table? Seen and not heard, I replied. Man, I'd been through that one before, and I didn't need a choke collar. A few years ago, the very first hello over the pooch the Russians sent winging into outer space in the Sputnik aroused a strange reaction around the world. Possibly the Arabs were not concerned, since to the average Arab a dog is a miserable miskeen of a creature fit only for kicks and slow starvation. But the rest of the world, even the Russians themselves, suddenly got all upset over this poor Fido whirling above the globe in a Arstaz satellite, eating when his Pavlov-developed reflexes answered a bell, and finally dying in his unearthly kennel. Now, indeed, in human indignation was science fiction married to fact. Somebody was mistreating a dog. The outcry was loudest in Britain, but most of the world's journalists abandoned scientific speculation for front-page evaluation of the pup's chances of homing back to this globe. It was touching and shocking in that it took a small bitch to bring the world face to face with reality, and all of a sudden the old man figured towered tremendously in my mind over Khrushchev, Einstein, and all the scientists and technicians everywhere who dealt in armament larger than a 12-bore shotgun. The old man would have been real mad about this mutt being perverted into a dog in the moon. He had very strong ideas about dogs, and none of them included putting a pooch in a pressure-proof kennel and shooting him out of a rocket into the stratosphere to die in loneliness, with no fleas to scratch and no human hand upon its head. Dogs, the old man used to say, are a cut better than people and should be treated according to their station and their worth. Even a trash dog has got a certain nobility about him and should be allowed to pursue happiness in his fashion. A trash dog, by the old man's definition, was any dog who had no real function by which he earned his food. A Dane, a Peak, a Poodle, a Pug, each was trash in the old man's reckoning. A yaller cur that would run rabbits, a black curl-tailed Feist that would tree squirrels, any bastard brindle of bulldog, coomhound that would run a deer, even a hardy cocker spaniel that would work in the woods were borderline between trash and quality. The quality started with pure-blood walker hounds, big springers, Chesapeakes, and beagles, hovered momentarily over setters of all breeds except Irish. You got to relearn the dod blonde dogs every year, and they're as flighty as a red-headed woman. and wound up with pointers. The old man mightily fancied pointers and was willing to argue that while the Carolina briars would leave a pointer's tail bloody, he was better fitted for hot bush work than a heavy-haired setter. He made only one exception, our big, rangy Llewellyn setter named Frank, a blue-tick genius that knew internal calculus where quail were concerned, and was haired almost as thinly as a pointer. I reckon the old man owned as astute a set of ideas about dogs as anybody I ever met. I do not say he was harsh, but he was powerful stern. For instance, he refused to pamper a working dog, a hound or a bird dog, by turning it into a house pet. He would compromise with a retriever, though a spaniel or a Labrador, because the retriever's work was actually fun and couldn't be spoiled by steam heat or female coddling. A hound dog or a bird dog belongs to live outside the house, he said. Bring him into the house except for an occasional visit like Christmas, and you lose a good workman and get yourself a dod-blimmed lapdog that won't hunt unless he feels like it, because he thinks he's as good as you. A good hunting dog is kind of religious. You ought to mortify his flesh a little bit to keep him in line. You keep him penned so he won't waste his energy ambling around aimless, and when you turn him loose, he knows he's in business. Also, you keep him a little bit thin when he ain't working so he won't be wheezing when the season opens. When you feed him strong, because he'll run off what extra victuals you shove into him. I don't know what the fashionable fare for hunting dogs is today, but we never had any cases of malnutrition on a more or less steady diet of table scraps, cold hominy, green vegetables, and cornbread. Old Galena and later Big Lil used to make enormous pans of cornbread for the animals, and to the best of my memory it tasted just as good as what we had on the table. They were fed once a day at 5 p.m., and they were fed together but in separate plates. Mostly our dogs were males, but there was no fighting. The old man discouraged fighting from puppyhood by rebuking the combatants personally with a stick and then removing their meal. A greedy gut, he used to say, has got more sense than a brain. We gave them the cheapest butcher's meat once or twice a week, and once a week a can of salmon, which at the time cost about 14 cents. For a treat, there was an occasional tin of prepared dog food, not oddly enough, for this was well over 30 years ago. The old man dosed most meals heavily with fish oil. This was easy to come by and cheap too, because we lived in a community that produced a great deal of fish scrap fertilizer from the enormous shoals of pogies or menhaden that provided the village with a major industry. It seems heretical now, but we also fed them whole fish and chicken bones. The old man's justification was simple. What is a dog, he would ask himself rhetorically? A dog is a descendant of a wolf. A fox is his cousin. What does a wolf eat? What does a fox eat? What he can catch. Rabbits, birds, small game. In Alaska, the huskies eat a steady diet of nothing but fish. All of this stuff has got bones. A dog's got enough quicklime in his digestive apparatus to melt an iron bar. If he gets something stuck in his throat, he just throws up. You let any one of those modern pampered critters loose, and he'll eat or try to eat anything he comes across in the woods. He'll eat it dead and rotten, fur, feathers, bones, and all. I never knew of a dog dying of indigestion, and up to now I never heard of one choking to death on a chicken bone. It is very possible that I learned my first lesson in general sanitation apart from discipline from the old man and the dogs. After I graduated from being Mammy Laura's do boy, which meant that I was vice president in charge of holding the kitchen door open for my ancient mammy, a former slave, I achieved the adult position at the age of about 6 of being the dog boy. The dog boy's job was to see that the animals got fed promptly and to train the puppies not to attack their food until the command, "high on," was given. Undue exercise of appetite was prevented by holding the puppies firmly by the tails and saying "whoa" when they bolted for the food. In a week's time they ate on command. Another chore of the dog boy was to see that every kennel was aired daily, and that the pine straw that made the bed was replaced weekly. We built simple kennels, a big packing box stilted dry off the ground on bricks with a flat top that could be turned back on its hinges to let the sun in. Pine straw, I do believe, is still the cleanest and warmest material for a dog's nest, as it seems to have some sort of aromatic resistance to insects. Also, it was great fun going out once a week in the towering, to a small boy, forest to sweep bagfuls of the clean brown needles in the hushed cathedral of the pine groves. If I was feeling especially virtuous, I would also lug home a crock a sack full of the fallen cones, which made magnificent kindling, and issued a lovely, almost incense-like smell to grown-ups. That is, me, I preferred the smell of baking bread. The dog boy was simultaneously in charge of defleeing, and in the rare instance that when mange crept unbidden into the run, it was the dog boy who cured himself as well as the afflicted animal with a tremendously potent mixture of burnt crankcase oil and sulfur. Neither the dog boy nor the dog smelled so good as formerly, but the mange generally departed. Today I know that most things seem better in retrospect, but I cannot begin to tell you the thrill there is in taking a hand-trained puppy, a puppy you've sweated through boyhood, adolescence, manners, mange, and his natural exuberance of spirit into the woods, and have him make you look good in front of your elders. Dogs are kind of like people, the old man once said. You generally get out of them what you put in them. There's good dogs and bad dogs, dumb dogs and smart dogs that are actually too big for their britches. But mainly speaking, you can correct up or down and get yourself a decent four-legged citizen if you go about it right. A taste of a switch and a little explanation as to why, and you got yourself a dog that won't run rabbits and a boy that won't stick up banks. Every time I read a new headline about that poor dog in the Sputnik, the old man kept coming back stronger than the beep. It had nothing to do with the sacrifice of dog for science or in any unique sentimentality over animals, as we know that a great many animals have died that people may live. It was just a sense of outrage at the unfitness of things, at the futility of using a dog, good, bad, or indifferent, where a dog didn't belong. A working dog, the old man said, don't belong to live in a house. A pet dog don't belong to live outside the house. A pet dog is different from a work dog, but all dogs have a dignity that ought to be respected, and any lost hound worthy of his grits will eventually find his way home. I guess what made me real mad was that this critter wasn't ever going to find her way home, and the fault was not hers. Somehow a dog has too much dignity to get her tail caught in any kind of machine away up yonder when she can't hear a whistle.